All right, guys, check it out. If you want the best tips to making your Yamaha blaster sick fast, then stick around. And also in next week's video, we're going to be slapping a turbo on this. So yes, a lot of cool things to talk about here in just a few minutes. All right, so check it out, guys. I got my hands on this budget blaster. If you guys were watching last week's video, you would have saw that when I was doing the kids quads for Christmas and surprising them, that this blaster was the first initial blaster I went to pick up. Got a great deal off subscriber Mike. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the good deal, brother. And then, so what we're gonna do in this video is I'm going to put together, basically slap together-ish, a budget drag blaster, and then we're gonna see how fast we can get this thing to go in this video. These are pretty simple to build. I should be able to get this done in a couple days. We're gonna port this thing, so I'll give you guys a couple tips on porting. I've got a few other little tricks lined up in my sleeve here. If you guys watch, you'll see them. Blasters do have a ton of potential. They are a two-stroke air-cooled, I want to say 6-speed, but off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't always just go and do a bunch of research into every fine, minute detail. But with that being said, I do have some cool parts on the way, should be here today. Hopefully, the shipping gods are with me on that one. But yeah, so I've got some parts for this. I've got an aftermarket pipe and silencer. I don't think we're going to use the silencer. I might just put a stinger on the end. We'll do like a drag pipe. I'll get this thing all put together, all ported, and then next week I've got a turbo on the way for this thing. I'm going to be doing a turbo two-stroke video. I'm curious actually to see if you can turbo a two-stroke. I know there's a lot of naysayers out there that say you can't do it. I am big on turbo stuff. As you guys know, I have lots of turbo vehicles here, but they're turbo 4-strokes, turbo LS, 2JZ, stuff like that. That's what I've been into in the side that I don't do in my main videos here on the channel. But with that being said, I have a great deal of knowledge for turbos, and I would love to see if we could turbo this little two-stroke. I think we can do it. I'll talk about theory and stuff like that next week and how that pressure and stuff's gonna work. We won't get into those details in this video, but yeah. So let me get all this stuff over to the workbench, and then we'll get cracking here on this build. All right, guys, so now that I've got everything over here on the bench to get started, we're going to be doing some port work before I put the bottom end together. And let's talk about this blaster just real quick before I get into the porting side of this. This is actually a true budget build. I paid $500 off subscriber Mike for this. Really appreciate that. You can find good deals like that out there on Marketplace if you look hard enough. $400, $500, $600, $700 blaster rollers with motors that need a little bit of work are out there, and top end kits for these are ridiculously cheap. $100, $150, you can get a Wiseco top end with a Chinese cylinder, and they'll work okay for a good long period of time. Just like any two-stroke, they need their maintenance, and then once in a while they need to be rebuilt. But with that being said, we're going to be optimizing this budget build to the best of our abilities. This will be the best $500 I ever spent. It came with a ton of extra parts, A-arms, swing arm, I think a rear end. It came with a fresh Wiseco top end, a bunch of brand new OEM Yamaha stuff like an intake, little bolts and washers and stuff like that that were missing from the original bottom end. So it's got everything here basically to make this a complete running driving quad again. It did also come with some really nice shiny new Mayer plastics, the updated rear fenders on those and everything, but I took those, like I said in last week's video, and put them on my kids' blaster. So yeah, anyways, we've got an FMF pipe and silencer, and a gold series, just standard FMF pipe. This thing's pretty crunchy looking. We're gonna go ahead and clean it up with a grinder, put a quick coat of VHT clear on it. It'll look a little bit better for the video. Not a big deal. I care more about the performance aspect of that. This isn't gonna be a show bike by any means. I'm literally just throwing this thing together to see how much power we can get out of this without doing crazy astronomical things like a stroker, bottom end and stuff like that, which I really did want to do, by the way, but not in this video. So I've got my cylinder here. I'm about to get started with porting this. I'm not here to teach you guys how to port. I actually had to do a little bit of research on my own to be able to port a blaster cylinder. I've done a bunch of Banshee cylinders and other two-strokes, but I've never done a blaster before, so I had to look up to see how to optimize the porting on this. Standard stuff with two-stroke porting. There's lots of casting flaws. I'll show you guys some close-ups of the transfer ports. You know, you can see we can knife edge a lot of these, take a little bit of material out, smooth the edges, you know, stuff like that. That'll help the flow of the bottom end. And the exhaust, we can take a bunch out of the exhaust. You'll see an orange mark here. I actually went ahead and put paint marker on the exhaust and then put that in the cylinder outlet here so that we could get a rough idea of how much material we can remove from the exhaust port. And then we will probably lift that 1 millimeter, and then we will shape the upper sides of that port a little bit, and that will be glassy smooth, hopefully, by the time we're done with that, so that that air can flow in and out of there really good. But I'll show you guys some close-ups, and we'll talk a little bit more about the finished product once I'm done. I'm just using a standard Harbor Freight or Amazon special. I think this one I got off Amazon. It was like 80 bucks, and then 10 bucks for the little carbide bit set that goes with it. It's got a nice little foot pedal control and a nice little flex shaft. And then I bought the stand for like 10 bucks. That's what you see hanging there. And then this is super simple stuff. I actually do have a Dremel kit with the Dremel brand, but I like these better for heavier duty porting. And then that's for like my touch-up work, you know, when I go to smooth everything out and stuff like that. So this is what I like to use for my heavy removing of material. So all right guys, let's get started with the porting. See you guys when we're done. All right guys, so now that we got the porting done, let's give a quick talk sesh about this and see why we did what we did. Now, what I will say is I did not go full on drag port for this port job. This is like an above mild trail port. This will gain you quite a bit of low end grunt, still giving you a decent amount of compression and not raising the exhaust so much that you lose the compression and it will scream a lot more, but you will not have any low end grunt. I wanted there to still be some grunt because when we do the turbo action, I feel like we're gonna need that to get the turbo spooled up. So, and like I said, in the next video, we'll get into why that is. We'll get into the theory and the concept behind the turbo and how all that stuff works. Anyways, the exhaust I opened up quite a bit, probably about 2 to 3 millimeters total diameter, and then I reshaped the top of the exhaust port and made it completely smooth. Now the camera doesn't do it as much justice as in person here, but I'm telling you, this thing is glassy smooth, and I just didn't have the sanding bits and the polish to give this, you know, the polished look, but I'm telling you, this will flow 10 times better than it did from the factory with all those imperfections and the fluid dynamics slowing this exhaust pressures down. So with that being said, the intake, I did a little bit of shaping on the intake, not a whole lot. I did go ahead and open up this bridge in the middle and try to knife edge it. The bit set that I got, I didn't have the one bit that I wanted to be able to like really sharpen the centerpiece. I did lower the boost port just a tad, and then I roughed up the entire inside here where the air will hit to help atomize all of the fuel. I did not lift the intake ports at all, but I did get rid of a lot of casting imperfections. And then, so with the added flow and everything, this should really help this motor breathe. Moving on to the transfer ports, we did pay a little bit of attention to the knife edging on the transfer ports as well. Really helps the flow when this piston's going up and down to force the air into the transfer ports. It helps push it through a lot smoother and better. We did take some material out, tried to keep it equal on both sides. Obviously, you're gonna have to rely on your eyes to do a lot of that. And I did not change the port timing of the transfer ports at all, but I did remove as much basically casting flaws as I could and knife edge those and open them up just a hair on the bottom side of the cylinder. So that's pretty much our porting. I did go ahead and give this a quick hone as well with the fresh set of rings and fresh piston. I feel like we definitely needed a hone at least. There's quite a bit of material on the cylinder yet. This piston slides in there nice and snug, so I have no fears that this thing won't be a ripper when we're done. Guys, with that being said, I did leave a lot of porting on the table yet. You could open up the piston windows. You could do gas porting. You could do, you know, a really wild exhaust port where you lift that thing 2, 3, 4 millimeters. But like I said, you're going to lose a lot of low end and compression. You know, you can always take more material off later, but you can't add it back once it's gone unless you go out and get another cylinder and spend another 6 hours porting one. Because yes, that's what I have into porting the cylinder today. I have about 5 to 6 hours into this already. So I like to take little by little off. We'll test the power out, and if we need to modify it before we put the turbo on, we will modify it. All right, guys, let's get the bottom end over here, and we'll start slapping this motor together.
Alright guys, so one small step I'd like to add here is that I almost always resurface an unknown cylinder head. My technique is crude and cheap, but it works wonders. Using a straight board or piece of countertop and some sandpaper glued down very flatly, using back and forth and also X pattern movements, while also applying even pressure and slow will help get your head straight. I would like to note here that I do have a mill and am capable, however I prefer to work with my hands when time permits. Also, you can remove extra material for added compression, however, due to adding a turbo to a high compression 2-stroke is most likely not the best idea, being as I have little to no experience adding a turbo to a 2-stroke engine to begin with at this point.
Alright guys, so I was preparing the bottom end, and as you can see, I have a welder out currently. I got a pretty stubborn stuck bolt here. You can see I already stripped it out pretty good. It's holding the passenger side crank seal in, this little, whatever you want to call it. I don't know the technical term. But I basically ground the head off of this a little bit, cleaned it up, ground the bottom of this. I'm going to weld this on there and then use a socket to turn that out. Plus the heat from the welder ought to help break free and expand the aluminum. It should help break free any red Loctite or blue Loctite or anything on the threads in there. Somebody probably just gooped a whole bunch on there. But yeah, this is my method. I use my Miller welder. I get her all welded up real good, and I'll break it free immediately, hopefully, fingers crossed. All right, now I leave the welder running, and we'll go ahead and see if this sucker will break free. Just in case we got to put another weld on her. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this with 2 hands. Oh, look at that. Broke free right away. See, that's just how good that method works. I can't grab that with... Yeah, see, that's hot because I just got done welding it, but literally we'll take that right out of there for you. Pretty simple, guys. Nice little method there. And then either just need to get a new bolt, or I happen to have an entire thing of bolts over there where I could stick a brand new bolt in here with a hex head on it, or also round head. So yeah, get it.
Next step, cleanliness is next to godliness. Let's get the bottom end clean. I have this nice, barely used Harbor Freight parts washer with some cleaning degreaser and water mixed 50-50. Works fine for me.
Alright guys, now that we got the cases cleaned up, we got everything ready to be assembled. Before we assemble it, I said in the beginning of this video, I would give you guys some free tips and tricks on how to get the most power out of your Yamaha blaster. And a lot of these tips can be applied across the board with 2-strokes, like porting, for example. But porting wasn't the only thing I set out to give you guys in this video. So I did a bunch of research on Yamaha blasters and what else we could do to gain some performance. Now, I'm not going to get into electrical ignition on this portion of the video. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but in this portion we're going to talk about the counterbalance shaft. So Yamaha blasters have a counterbalance shaft, and it's very, very heavy. Now you cannot remove this without a lot of vibration going on in these motors. But what you can do is this external, or I should say internal rotating mass on these four-wheelers. You can actually remove some material off of this, and it will actually help the engine rev up a lot faster to what I read online. Now, that makes sense in my head. Lessening the rotating mass should, in theory, help the engine rev much faster. So we're gonna put this on the lathe and take a little bit of material off of it. I think what we're gonna do is just remove this lump off the top and make this completely flush, and then we'll install it back in the engine. If it doesn't work, these engines are really super simple to take apart. If it has some crazy vibration and didn't help anything, obviously I'll swap that back out. But I think for the purpose of this video, we'll give that a shot and see if that actually works. Alright guys, so you can see here I took about half of that weight off. I'm very happy with that. I don't think I'm going to go any further than that. For those of you who are trying this at home, if you have a small lathe and you want to give it a shot, I recommend maybe half and then see how it runs. Obviously, if you want to go the full way, all the way down to flush, that is completely up to you. You do have still quite a bit of weight there and girth there, even if you do go all the way down. So all right, guys, so now that we got the balance shaft trimmed down a little bit, we put her on a weight loss diet, got her about halfway down roughly. I think I took about 80 to 100 thousandths of material off. Probably weighs in the neighborhood of like, 1 to 2 ounces of steel. It's not a lot. It's not a lot at all. And so we should be good there. I think that's a good modification. We'll get a slightly faster rev out of this thing. Moving on to some other free tips you can do. Once we get this bottom end sealed up, we can move on to the shift star. I'll show you guys what you can do there to get some quicker shifts out of this bad boy without upgrading the transmission. So let's try to keep this bottom end install super simple. I actually have the transmission fully put together already. For you guys that don't know how to put transmissions together, or which fork goes where does the drum go and where's every little clip, nut, and bolt go, I don't remember all of that stuff for each build either. I actually, like Banshees, I know off the top of my head because I've built, handfuls and handfuls of Banshees. But like a Blaster, I've only built a couple of these bottom ends. So I don't know a whole lot about them, like where each little individual piece goes. What I do is I go to Rocky Mountain ATV, my favorite website for diagrams. And you can go over to the left side. I'll post a picture here for you guys. And you can click on OEM and go into Yamaha Blaster for this one. And then you would scroll down and they have a list of all the parts, and each one gives you a diagram of every single little component on the entire motor. You just have to pick the right explanation of the diagram. So like crankcase would be this one. Transmission would be just the transmission components. The balance shaft might be in with the crankshaft. So some things can be a little disorganized as far as that goes, which it's like that from the manufacturer. That's not Rocky Mountain's fault. But yeah, so I use Rocky Mountain. I see where every little clip, nut, and bolt, washer, spacer, whatever it is, wherever it goes, I check out that diagram first, get all my stuff laid out, and then I start putting her together. So let's get this bottom end installed, and then we can move on to some other cool free tips and tricks for you. Okay, one thing I'd like to point out really quick when you're building these bottom ends is your crank should spin like this when you're done installing and tightening all of your bolts. See how free that rolls? Every crank should be that free or very close. You should be able to at least move it with your fingers by the rod here, even if it requires just a tiny bit of force. These bearings are seasoned, obviously, and there was a tiny bit of dents on the cage on the inside. I actually wound up taking this apart quite a few times until I figured out there was a bunch of bearing material or piston material underneath this inner bearing here. I had to wind up popping that bearing out, cleaning that hole in a race, putting it back together, and then reinstalling the bottom end. Also, transmission should also roll just as free as the crank. And that's, fully tightened with my 3-bond, the same stuff I use on every 2-stroke bottom end, because these babies are sealed at the crank. Don't forget that. So, all right, let's get it.
Now that we got the cases together, we have to get the new clutch soaked. I like to use automatic transmission fluid, otherwise known as ATF plus 4, in most of my 2-stroke bottom ends, including my 100 horsepower plus drag Banshee. The only downside is you have to change the fluid out quite often, more so than oil. These should soak for around 24 hours or so, then we can move on to installing the clutch side of the engine, which is very simple on this little single cylinder 2-smoker. I used my diagrams a lot here to make sure I had all of my washers for the clutch basket lined correctly, and that's when I hit a slight snag, but we'll talk about that here in a few moments.
Alright guys, so let's talk about our next free and cheap modification. So we talked about the balance shaft to delete. On this one, we're going to be doing the shift star. I'll show some close-ups here. Basically from the factory, the 6 points on the star, or should I, yeah, no, 5 points on the star. Let me correct myself. 5 major points on the star. I wouldn't touch the ones for neutral where the divot is. But the 5 on the outside for shifting, this is a very common modification in Yamaha Banshee. It's literally the same exact design. The drum is on this shift star. We have a little cantilever here with a spring load on it. And then we have a rod with your shift lever that moves it up and down. So one of the modifications is we round the nubs off on the 6 points of the star. This makes shifting super, super smooth. Like I said though, highly recommend you do not take the nubs down on the neutral position. That's the half, that's not the full lump, that's the half lump. So I recommend leaving that alone, so that way you can still find neutral very, very easily, but the rest of the nubs you can take down pretty good bit. I wouldn't go crazy because you still need this little disc, if you will, to sit in between for your shifts so that the gears don't jump or anything like that. So don't go super crazy. Kind of follow my lead here a little bit and just take a little bit off, round it off just a little bit. So. All right guys, so last tip of this video I'm gonna give you guys. This should complete the free tips and tricks for the Yamaha Blaster, at least to my knowledge. If there's more out there, please, please, please drop me a comment below, let me know. I'd be happy to tear back into this thing and apply anything else that's already been done. I've done my research here. I think we're good to go, but if not, let me know. So moving on, we talked about porting. We've got the porting, you know, we got a good upper trail port for this thing. She should be a ripper. We've got the counterbalance shaft trimmed down a little bit of weight savings on that rotational mass will help this rev just that little bit more quicker on the rev response. And then also the shift drum rounding the edges off will make this baby shift super smooth. So when we're power clutching through the gears, she ought to be really quick shifting and not have any problems missing a gear, which, as you guys know, your boy misses gears quite frequently if you're watching my shorts. Anyways, moving on, the last tip I'm going to give you guys is ignition timing. Some of you may already know this, but OEM, they come with no modification. It's just a straight hole with your screws going through. On these Chinese plates, they are adjustable. You can adjust your timing for retard or advance. I'm not sure how many degrees. I know on the Banshees, they can go up to plus or minus 10 degrees. It looks about the same on this plate, but I have to do some measurements and some calculations with the circumference to see the actual degreeage here. I'm probably going to be safe and run this in the 3 to 4 degree range and still put high test fuel in this, because I am going to run just a touch tighter squish on this, so that way we can make all the ponies. And I'll talk about that in the next video. But yeah, so you can actually advance this a few degrees, give yourself a little bit of a boosty booster there. I don't see a gain to run in retarded timing, a little bit of more of a retard, other than if you're doing like a boosted application like we're going to be doing. So we will be able to play around with that a little bit. or super, super high compression, but then you're kind of defeating the purpose because the advance helps it go faster. So if you start to lose your ignition advance and then you run it just a little bit higher compression, then it's kind of defeating the purpose. Why not just go higher compression, or why not just go a little bit less compression and run the timing a little bit more advanced? Every builder's different, every racer's different. There's a million ways to get your horsepower out of every machine. These are just the ways that I'm doing it. Obviously, you don't have to follow what I'm saying and doing, if you catch what I'm putting down. All right, guys, check it out. So I did want to do the entire build in one video, but unfortunately, time is not on my side and parts are not on my side. I'm missing two very important things. One is the ball for the clutch rod assembly, in between the two rods for the clutch assembly on this to actuate the clutch when you pull in the lever, and it actuates it. The other thing I'm missing is a washer for the outside of the basket that locks the nut in place. So unfortunately, I can't fully finish putting this bottom end and top end together and put it into the quad and start it and ride in this video. That was my goal for this video, but unfortunately, I made a mistake. Sorry, guys. Don't beat me too hard in the comments below. But I do have a special surprise. Something came in the mail today. I did post it on my Instagram. If you guys didn't see it, check it out here. Check it out. This is the turbo we're going to be running on the Blaster in a couple of weeks. My goal is for next week's video to get this thing fully running and driving, fully tested, naturally aspirated, and then in the following week or the week after that, because I do have to finish the Scammers Banshee, we have to get that thing fully done running and back to Mr. Gary, so that way he could be ripping that thing. And then also, the week after that, we'll probably do the turbo setup on this Blaster. Yes, that is right. We are going to be doing the turbo setup on this Blaster. I think it should be pretty cool. This turbo's pretty properly sized for this. It should spool it up. This was for a 3-cylinder diesel Kubota. It's an RHB 31 turbo. I do think this will make some nice whooshy sounds and a few pounds of boost to add, so we can actually see if you can turbo a 2-stroke or not. Efficiently, that is. Efficiently. So guys, with that being said, if you think this thing's going to be a ripper, as always, drop me that like, share. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.